folks, welcome back. This is Joel, and in this video we will start looking at ISE, right? And I'm planning to do a bunch of videos on ISE as well going forward, because it's been some time since I played around with it. It's around I think probably a year back when I was preparing for my CCI. I had done a lot of extensive study here, but then since then there has been a lot of changes with the GUI and a lot of new features have come in, so I thought this is a good time to do a refresher. That being said, the topology is pretty straightforward. I have a switch, I have ISE and domain controller directly connected to it. Domain controller has all my DHCP, DNS, and I don't know, all my services, right? Active Directory, certificate authority, and all of that, right? Pretty straightforward. You can see here, this is my domain controller. The other one is my ISE. I have not completely installed it. I will take you through the various steps to install it and do some initial configurations to set it up on Eve. So that's pretty much it. Let me just grab this, give me a second. Alright, so for folks who are basically coming on to this video for the first time, right, or maybe who have not played around with ISE before, I thought I'll do a quick refresher on what ISE is and how it really helps in your network. So ISE, like I said, it stands for Identity Services Engine. Let me just grab my pen. I think that's working. Okay, that's good. Cool. So Identity Services Engine, right? Now ISE, when I talk about ISE, right, these are the three things which really come on the top of my mind. One is it provides you visibility, right? It provides you visibility, context about everything which is touching your network, right? I'll tell you what context actually means, right? So context, this is a very important point when you talk about visibility. Now context in this in this particular here, context, what does context actually mean? It basically tries to tell you who is connecting to your network, right? It tries to get information on what is connecting, right? Is it some kind of a let's say, is it a mobile phone, is it a iPad, is it a PC, right? Or is it a network device, right? So it gives you the context. It understands, or it tries to fetch the information as to where the connection is coming from, right? And which section of the network, right? And then when, right? It also logs when the connection came in, the time, right? And also you can also add the out part, right? It also tries to understand how the connection is coming. Is it a wired connection? Is it a wireless connection? Or is it a VPN, and so on, right? So ISE provides this, all of this information, which is really necessary when you talk about security, because security is all about visibility, right? More and more visibility you have, more and more secure you're gonna get, right? Second thing is your, I would say, your second interesting point is your control, right? Now control, when I talk about control, it's all about having a single place. So ISE basically acts like the single, single dashboard, or a single, source of truth for deploying your, policies, right? Doing segmentation, doing your SG ACLs and so on, right? Which we have kind of looked into a bit in our SD access videos. The other one is your compliance. This is very interesting. So there are a lot of customers who really want to understand where do they stand with respect to compliance. Are all their endpoints, running some kind of antivirus, right? And all of that. So that's another key importance of ISE. So whenever I talk about ISE, for me, these are, these three are like the pillars of it: visibility, control, and compliance, right? Now, if I have to show you a typical, right, so that's why I'm using the word typical, because obviously there are different types of deployments of ISE, but a typical deployment, I would say, is, let's draw the network, right? So you're gonna have, say, a mobile phone here, right? We draw a mobile phone. Hope that is, yeah, this is a mobile phone, right? Then you have a laptop, right? So this is another endpoint, and you can probably have a remote laptop as well, right? Let's call this as remote. Now I'll tell you why I call that as remote, right? So when I talk about mobile phone, generally, you connect them via wireless, right? So you're going to have something like this. The media here is going to be wireless. And what is going to be a NAD? So this section is basically called as endpoints, right? These are your endpoints, because they have here, this is where your clients connect, your mobile phone, your PC, right? Your remote PC and all of that. Next, what you have, the next section, right, which is very important for our understanding, is the NAD section, right? So NAD is basically very important. All right, so NAD is very important because it's a network access device. So NAD could be various types of devices, right? So that's very interesting about ISE because it supports a variety of NADs. Like for example, here, I can have some kind of an AP, right? Or I can also have a WLC, right? Because it's a wireless, right? And here for the PC, I can have some kind of a switch, right? I'll have a switch over here because that will act as a NAD because this is going to be a wired connection, right? Whereas here it is going to be wireless connection. And why did I write this as remote? Because here this is going to be, let's call it as, this is, I'm just using red here just to show that it's a VPN connection. So I can have a VPN connection from some kind of a remote device, right? Terminating on a firewall, right? So here the NAD is going to be a firewall, right? And all these devices can now, kind of connect to this single source of truth, which is our, ISE, right? And ISE will play the point in kind of authenticating all these various kinds of devices, right? On top of that, ISE can further integrate with other, something very common in an enterprise network is your Active Directory, AD, right? So you probably would have heard of that. It basically has all your usernames, passwords for an enterprise. So it can integrate with that as well. So ISE is kind of like, think of it as a AAA server, right? Which is able to provide access to every single client in your network. It can provide access to your network devices itself. Further, it provides this context. This context is very important, right? Who is connecting, what is connecting, where the connection is coming from, when is it happening, and how is the connection being created. So this information, right, it logs this information for every single connection, right? Now because it has this information, right, we can now even share that information with other probably third-party products or even other Cisco products, right? Let me just grab this and clear this off a bit. I'm very messy with my drawings. I gotta improve my skill. Okay, so that's gonna remove everything. Just give me a second. Just get rid of this. Let me just get rid of this as well. Okay, that's bad. Okay, that's good. Now, what are the various use cases of ISE, right? So when you talk about ISE, there are a lot of use cases, and we'll try to cover some of those, in the series of videos. But just to give you some, understanding, one use case which I really like is the guest use case, right? So the guest use case, just get rid of that again, write it again, right? So the guest use case. So guest use case, what is a challenge here, right? You want to improve the guest access experience, without compromising security. So ISE provides what we call as, there are multiple ways of providing guest services. Here ISE has hotspot, right? You can think of it as a quick, easy internet access, right, without any credentials. So a guest comes into your network, he will basically get a internet access without providing any credentials. There is another thing called as self-registration, right? You would have probably seen this in airports and other enterprises where you have a simple portal based access, right? It allows the guests or contractors, whoever, to gain appropriate access level. So this portal can also admit registered users with elevated levels of access and so on. So that's another use case. So when I talk about use cases, I'm basically telling all of this can be provisioned within few minutes, right? You don't have to literally sit and do configurations. It's that simple, right? The other one is your sponsored access. So sponsored access is another one of my favorite, right? Whenever I meet some of my customers, right, they basically have implemented the sponsored access. So what this does is, this is more like if you're visiting someone in an organization, right, they can proactively kind of act as a sponsor, right? So they'll act as a sponsor to provide the guest, in this case, let's say me, with the internet access and appropriate levels of corporate intranet access, right? So they will create the username, right, and password for me, and they'll share it with me, and then I can use that to log into the network. So they are the sponsors, right? So guest is a very interesting use case. The other one is which I really like, is the BYOD, right? Nowadays, wherever you go to an organization, there are employees who bring in their own devices. They have iPads connecting to the corporate network. They have mobile phones and so on. They have like lots of devices, right? And ISE provides a very let's say a robust way to kind of provision or onboard this BYOD devices. We'll look into some of the details around this as well as we go ahead in some of our videos, right? So that's important, because the very need over here is, you could probably, if you allow, let's say, a device, let's say an iPad, right, and that iPad unfortunately has some kind of a malware, right, then you will basically be exposing your whole network to a malware which can kind of like compromise your network. So it's very important to do stuff like posture, profile, and all of that, and kind of like allow stuff which is which is in line with the company policy and so on. So there's cool stuff happening here in BYOD, so we could have a look at that later, right? Another use case, I think I just mentioned the posture and the profiling part, right? So profiling is interesting because so ISE has this way wherein or what's the challenge here, right? So device identification, right, takes a lot of time, like, for example, in an enterprise, you're gonna have printers, you're gonna have mobile phones, tablets, laptops, and a lot of that, right? So Cisco ISE makes it very easy, right? It has this automated device identification, right? So that's and how it does it. It basically does it by using various kinds of probes. So it sends various kinds of probes towards your devices endpoints and tries to analyze the response from these devices, and then tries to understand what kind of a device this might be, right? There are a lot of, let's say, signatures which are created or which are already present in ISE, which are enabling you to help with this, right? So these are some of the use cases. The other stuff is, I mean, there are hundreds of there are lots of these use cases. I can probably talk for hours over here, but I just wanted to give you a glimpse. Maybe one more we could talk is the SGT part, right? TrustSec, security group tags. If you have seen my previous video on SD access, I have touched a bit on this, especially on the policy videos. But the whole idea here is SGT, secure group tags, right? So till now we were kind of like providing access to resources based on IP address, right? Access list was our only way to provide access to throughout the network. But that kind of that whole paradigm changes with SGT. With SGT, what happens is you have users coming into your network, and as soon as they come in, you're giving them as simple as a tag, right? So if you have, say, Tom, you're basically giving him a tag of 5, right? And say Jerry comes in and he gets a tag of 10, right? So these tags are basically going to be associated with that particular user. So now throughout your network, you can define your access policies, right? So let's say Tom has just come into the network, and after traversing to the network, right, let's say there is a server here, right, and let's say Tom is some kind of an admin, right, and let's say Jerry is some kind of a guest user. Now obviously you want only the admin to have access to this server, and maybe you don't want this guy to have the access, right? So now you can easily define a very simple SGACL, right, probably at the egress, whichever switch is connecting to the server. You can have a SGACL saying allow 5, and obviously this server will have one more tag, right? When the server got authenticated, it also would have been provisioned some kind of a tag. So let's say there's a tag of 20 here. So on the switch over here, you can now define an SGACL saying 5 will be able to talk to 20, whereas 10 will not be able to talk to 20. So as simple as that. So now what you have done by doing this, it might look very simple, but what you have achieved by doing this is you have kind of like decoupled access policies from IP addresses. So now IP addresses have no relevance, right? Tomorrow Tom could be assigned a different address, right? He might not have the same IP address as today, but still this access policies holds good. Why? Because we are defining our SGACLs based on tags rather than defining it based on IP address, right? And there are a lot of cool stuff like inline tagging, XXP, and all of that. So we'll probably look into some of those as well. So yeah, just I wanted to give you a glimpse of various use cases, right, when it comes to your ISE. Now, apart from that, obviously, your traditional use cases are your .1x and MAB authentication of clients. So that's like the primary use case. So I'll not dig deeper because you probably would have read about that, already. Yeah, so now let's talk a little bit about the deployment part. So I've been referencing ISE to be one server, right? It's a server, yes, correct. You can get a dedicated appliance, or you can probably kind of like run this on a virtual machine as well, right? And that's what I'm actually doing here. I'm running it on a virtual machine, but you can get a dedicated server and have it deployed as well. But when you talk about deployment, before talking about deployment, you need to know there are when you talk about ISE, you can no longer call it just as a server. You need to you have different let's call it as it's called personas, right? Personas. So ISE is kind of like divided into different persona based on or let's say there are different functionalities inside ISE, right? So they have divided the ISE into mainly 3 separate personas, and they have divided the roles and responsibility of each persona. So you have the first one, which is your admin node. Then you have your policy, or let's say the second one, let's go for monitoring. You have a monitoring node, and then the last one is the policy node, policy service node, PSN. So this one is generally called as PAN. This is called as PSN because policy service node, and this is called MNT, monitoring node, right? So these are like your 3 personas, 3, you can call whatever you want. You can say 3 3 different types of roles and responsibilities, right? Now what does your admin guy do, right? So the admin one basically this is the section, or this is the component of ISE which is responsible for doing your configurations, right? All your policy configurations, right, is basically done here, right? It's a user interface basically. Literally, if you ask me in simple terms, it is the UI, right? This is where you basically log in and you do the basic policies and so on. Whereas what is your monitoring node? So this persona is kind of like the engine for collecting logs and so on, right? So visibility and all of that comes under this guy. So alarms, right? Logging and all of that, right? So monitoring, it's pretty straightforward, right? When you think about monitoring, what does come to your head? So all of those responsibilities are given to this node. And the last guy, which is going to be your policy PSN, policy service node, right? So this guy is one of the most important guy. At least I feel he is the most important one, because policy service node, he's the one who is going to do the policy decisions, right? It is going to process all kinds of network messaging, right? All the DHCP, radius, and all those messages which are thrown towards ISE. PSN is the one who is going to process it, and then it is going to take some action based on the policies. I mean, it's not going to enforce the policy, because enforcement of policy obviously happens at the NAD, which I showed you earlier, like the switches, the firewall, AP, wireless, WLC, and so on. But the place where the policy is getting acted upon, right? Once you have information coming from radius and all these probes, right? This is the place where the policy gets acted upon, and that's really one of the very important use case of the PSN, right? So this is literally, like, if I have to tell you, he's the heavy lifter out of all the 3 guys, right? He's the one who is going to get a lot of workload. Cool. So that being said, now there are different kinds of deployments. I think I have a page open here just to show you guys that. So there are different kinds of deployments. You can also go and check this out. I'm referring to the ISE installation guide 2.7. It also, you can go and do a deep study on all of these nodes, what these nodes accomplish and so on. But what I wanted to show you here is the various types of deployments, right? Now you see here there are quite a lot. In our lab, we'll obviously be using just one. I think I have my lab here. So in my lab I'll mainly be using one single node, because it's a very resource intensive plan, so I don't want to waste a lot of resources on this. But there are different kinds of deployments, right? So in a standalone I mean, in a small environment, you can probably run something like this. You can have a primary ISE and the secondary ISE. So all the three nodes three personas which I showed, right? The PAN, MNT, and the PSN, all of those, you can run it as primary here and secondary here, right? So whenever the primary goes down, you will have kind of like a backup guy to take care of stuff. Split deployments is something like this. So here you still have your primary and secondary, but what you do is in your NAD, your network access devices, you configure primary with a higher priority. So the radius requests, for some of the clients you configure this to be the primary, for some of them you configure the second one to be the primary. So more like your load balancing kind of a scenario, right? So you don't want all the load to come here, so that's why you kind of use it in this fashion. Then as and when you increase your network, increase the size of the network, you have other types of deployments, right? So one key thing you need to remember is if you're using each of the component which I showed you, right? The PAN, the MNT, and PSN, all of that, you can run it individually in separate nodes as well, right? So here you can see this is a very interesting deployment where they are using the first node for PAN and MNT. So it is the primary for PAN and secondary for MNT. This one is primary for MNT, secondary for PAN. So there is some primary secondary going on between these two guys. But then PSN is kind of decoupled out of these two nodes. So PSN is running separately on three other nodes, right? Because like I said, PSN is the one which is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It is the one which will get all the radius messages and so on. So they have put in three dedicated PSN nodes, and they have load balanced kind of between my for my PAN and MNT, they have load balanced, right? And as and when you become more and more bigger network, you can see you can do something like this. So there is, I'm not sure if this is mentioned here, but there's this one clause which basically says that if you're doing something like this, where you're load balancing PAN and MNT or running PAN and MNT on an individual node, this is basically called as a co-located node, right? So because you have PAN and MNT running on the same node, in that case you can have, I think, up to 5 PSNs, right? At least that was what I had read some time back. Not sure if that has changed with 2.7, but if you are doing a co-location kind of environment, then you can run like 5 PSNs. But if you have a dedicated, like here, I think they are using a dedicated, or maybe here, if you're using a dedicated node, let's say this is for PAN and this is for MNT, dedicated ones, then you can run up to 50 PSNs, right? So if you have a huge network, spread across geographic locations with like thousands of employees and thousands of endpoints connecting day in and day out, then you want to probably have a distributed, right, a huge network. So in that case, you can probably run close to 50 PSNs, right? So you can have 50 PSNs, and you can have your dedicated PAN and MNT as well. So that's mainly it, and so that's, again, you can go back and do a more research if you're doing deployments as such. The other one which I want to touch upon is the license part. So there is information about licensing here. Probably you can go down to Cisco ISE 2.7 admin guide licensing. Pretty straightforward, right? You have the base license. Perpetual means you buy it once and it's going to be there with you forever. So you get a bunch of services here, and if you want some extra services, you can go down to the plus license. And Apex license is also more like that, right? If you want to do posture and all of that, you would want this kind of a license. So mainly 1, 2, 3. So these are the licenses. Mobility and all of this, I think this was quite old licenses. I don't think they are used anymore. And if you scroll down at the bottom, you will see evaluation license. That's what we will, any ISE appliance, as soon as you install, you get the evaluation license, and it's going to be there with you for 90 days. And you basically get the functionality for 100 endpoints, and I think you basically get all features right with it. One thing which caught my eye here is the PxGrid. So let me spend a minute to explain about PxGrid, and then I think we are good to play around with our deployment, right? So PxGrid, I really like this concept, right? Now if you're unfamiliar with PxGrid, it's a really good concept. What it does is, instead of having having to create a single purpose, kind of like platform specific APIs to send information between ISE and other products, right? What Cisco came up with, they came up with a unified framework, right? So they came up with a unified framework. Do I have a picture? Maybe not. Okay. So So what they did was they came up with let me just draw this. So this is your PxGrid, and you have your ISE over here, right? You have let's say another Cisco solution which is CASB, right? The cloud broker. You have things like maybe some location services, right? Location services and so on. So what Cisco did was they came up with a unified framework for other vendors, right, to use or to share context and kind of information bidirectionally, right? What I mean by that is, take for example, you have a firewall, right? If you have come across I think in Firepower, especially in Firepower, you have this capability to kind of map the username to what? IP addresses, right? So usernames for every session, you can map it to the IP addresses from where they are getting logging in and so on. So imagine you have this with you. So on Firepower, you have this feature. But wouldn't it be great, while this is obviously great, but wouldn't it be great for identifying users, right? If you had more information, right? So you can, what if you had information like the various things which I defined here in the context, right? So you know the IP address, but what kind of a device is it? Where is the connection coming from? When did the connection start? And how did the connection come to? So you basically know who, probably you know the IP address, you know the username, but if you can have more information around that connection, you can make more better decisions, right? If you have to allow that particular connection or not, or you can define your policies based on that. So PxGrid is mainly, think of it like an API which is present here to share context, right? Policy configurations and all of that with other not only Cisco platforms, but also with like third-party devices, right? You can also now think about having some advanced use cases where firewall could like take a step further, right, and use this PxGrid to communicate, to mitigate an incident on the network as well, right? For example, if you have a client, right, imagine you have a client in your network who ended up downloading some kind of a malware, right? And at the time of the download, the firewall could not kind of like issue a disposition on that file and allowed the client to download it, right? Maybe the firewall did not have that signature and stuff like that, right? But after some time, the firewall might discover that this file was actually malware, right? Or maybe some kind of an antivirus like AMP might discover that this file is really a malware, right? And it can now, right, block the future downloads of that file, right? Not only on this device but also in other devices, right? And that, how does it do that? It can do that by providing some kind of this information which it has received, it can share with, say, probably like ISE, right? And a policy could be created on ISE to kind of blacklist the devices which are downloading these clients, because this malware, because then it can impact the whole network. So you can think of hundreds of use cases here, because now you're actually going to the next level where you're exchanging the policies, your configurations, your context and all of that with other security products to get the maximum value out of your security portfolio, right? And there is this PxGrid integration is there with a lot of Cisco security products and also with a lot of third-party products as well. Cool. So there was a lot of things probably I spoke. Hope I did not bore you. Now it's time to do a bit of our installation, I guess. So before doing that, let me show you what I have done till now. All right. So let's go back to my. Okay. So this is the topology, right? So ISE is here, but let me just show you where did I get this. I think I got it from here. Yeah. There we go. So if you go down to you have seen most of my videos, I try to do everything on ISE, right? So I try to do everything on EVE-NG. So I wanted to do ISE as well on that, and you have a very detailed guide on how to install ISE on EVE. Basically you gotta follow the steps as is, right? There's nothing changed, only the difference is they're using 2.6 here in the in the how to section, but I'm using 2.7. Other than that, it's exactly step-by-step process, right? So I have installed my ISE and I'm right now at this step, right, where I am supposed to kind of like, I have kind of you can say loaded the OS, but now this is the time we have to go and configure it. So that is what I have here on the screen. Cool. Let me just get rid of that. Okay, so that's what we have on the screen, and let's go about installing it. So this is the first screen which you get as soon as you install. So let's go and type in setup, and there you go. It is asking for a host name. I just gonna have only one particular node, so I'm gonna go with the host name as ISE itself. The IP address, so from our topology, let's see, the IP address is 172.16.32.102. so let's go with that. 172.16. Hope it's visible. I really can't get this up for some reason, but I think that's good. 172.16.32.102. that's good. The mask is going to be 255.0, and the default gateway is obviously 172.16.32.1. this is nothing but the my bad, 32.1. that's nothing but my R4 over here. For some reason I was not able to create an SVI over here and do NAT on it, so as a result I had to put one more R4. I'm using all IOL routers and switches here. I'm not sure, I think maybe the NAT is not supported on IOL, and maybe because of that I was not able to do it, so I had to put a separate router to do the NAT. So 170, because we are connecting to the internet, right, we really need a NAT device there. So 172.16.32.1, we are good there. That's the default gateway. Do we want to configure IPv6 address? Probably no, so let's go with that. The default DNS domain, it's going to be bitsplease.com. bitsplease.com. that looks good. So that's my DNS domain. So I've set up a DNS server as well. I'll show you that. Apart from that, what is the DNS server's IP address? So this is the DNS server, and let's see if I can get the IP address from here. Maybe I can do just IP config here. Give me a second. I believe it should be 172.16.32.40, right? So let's do that. 172.16.32.40. good. Secondary server, probably no. NTP. So in my case, I think I'm using my router as the NTP, right? So let's do that. So 172.16.32.1. Let me just quickly check that if that's right. So this is my R4. Let's see, show run section NTP. Okay, so that's that. Let's check what's the time. Show clock. It is using the UTC time, which is fine. So yeah, so the NTP is good. What else do I need here? Do you want to add one more NTP? Probably not. Time zone, I want to keep it as UTC, right? So let's keep UTC. Enable SSH service, probably yes. Okay, the admin is gonna be good. The password, let me define a password here. Okay, we'll have to add the password again. So the same password, I believe, will be used for CLI as well as the GUI. So it's trying to bring up the interfaces now. So now let me go and pause it because this might take few seconds, or a couple of minutes actually. Alright, hey guys, welcome back. So it took close to 30-40 minutes to install, and looks like it's finally up. I'm able to get into the box, and also maybe we could try to do a SSH probably from here. Let's see if we can do that. 172.16.32.102. Okay, so we are SSHing here too. Okay, admin, my password. Okay, there you go. So it's good. You can do anything you want now. We could check the show application status ISE, right? So this is a very interesting command to get to understand if your ISE is ready to do configs and all of that, right? So it's taking a bit of time. It's a bit slow. While that happens, we can load the UI as well. Okay, that's coming up, and here you go. looks like almost everything we want is running. See, XXP is not running because we have not enabled it, but you can, this is a very good command to do a troubleshooting and understand what is running, what processes are running and what is not running. So that's pretty good. This is the UI, right? Since I think because it's 2.7, there are quite some changes. Like for example, one thing is I can see here, I can add a new dashboard, I can add new dashlets right over here, so that you know, we can make it more and more relevant to our customers, right? In addition to that, you also have a drag and drop kind of a thing, right? So I can, like, you know, drag each of these dashlets on the other and kind of rearrange based on my need. Then there are a bunch of things, you know, there are a lot of dashboards here, or let's say panels here, which we will obviously explore as we go ahead with more and more you know, use cases. Since this is the first one, I just wanted to show you this, cover a basic, you know, cover all the basics regarding ISE, how it works, what is really useful for, and you know, also kind of go and install ISE, right? So this is my topology. So in this video, we kind of did a review, and then we installed ISE, you know, on EVE-NG, and looks like everything is up. You can see connectivity is there. Like for example, I can also see that from my ISE, I should be able to do a ping to 8.8.8 to check if my internet is working fine. Yeah, there you go. I have the connectivity to 8.8.8. So we are all set. So do come back for more videos, and we'll do some interesting use cases with ISE. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.